Hello. I'm the last speaker of the evening I just heard, so I will make it quick. When talking to Antonio what to talk about, I offered to talk about performance and metrics, and he said, well, I'm covering that. So I did ask, hey, what else should I talk about? And then I think it was Helen who said, well, maybe the future of Bazel. And so I did ask my colleagues what they're working on, and let's have a look. So you might use remote execution today where you have a Linux machine locally and you have Linux RBE remotely, and that works fine. But then you have developers who love their Macs and they develop locally on their Macs. And that doesn't fit with Linux remotely. And there's this problem that for clean builds, remote execution helps a lot. It makes this a lot faster. But for incremental builds, you really want to use your local machine, especially these beefy M1 machines. They make it really fast to have this iterative development fast. So we want to mix those two things, and we thought about that. We have dynamic execution that in general makes it possible to do local and remote development in one invocation, and Bazel just braces those two action invocations and takes the faster one. But now it's not the exact same invocation if you have a Mac locally and Linux remotely. So what we came up with is, well, this is really a hard problem. We first need to prototype this somehow to validate that this is actually helpful. So Tiago wrote a prototype based on fat binaries. Basically, your tool chain is 2-in-1, and then we select the right tool chain wherever the action is executed. We were running this with Opia, one open source Android app, with Bazel itself. We saw, okay, this is really helpful for those cases, but we would like to ask you to try this out yourself on your Android, on your Java apps. Scan the QR code. There's a document which describes how to test this out and how to give us feedback and how to tell us, this is good, this speeds up our builds, please make this a proper feature, because we need this justification to actually do the complex change inside of Bazel to do the right thing here. There is this burden on rule authors that I mentioned here, where you have to opt into this approach and say, well, my rule is agnostic of the actual platform it's running on. We know that a couple people work around this problem by just saying, well, I have my tool in ambient in the environment, and I will just call those tools from the environment, but we think this is not the proper way to do it. And that should be a proper Bazel feature. So please help with testing and report back. Still, remote execution, I think remote execution is one of the big selling points of Bazel. We have for some time now this feature which is called build without the bytes, where we don't download intermediate artifacts if we don't have to. Dynamic execution makes this sometimes that we have to download those intermediate artifacts to do the race, but otherwise we don't do this. It saves a whole lot depending on your network speed, and we want to turn this on by default in Bazel 7. So that is a little bit ambitious. We have a couple things to iron out that I listed here. Cho has started implementing his idea of a release service, which addresses the problem where the object falls out of the remote cache. So you can imagine you get back a cache hit, but then a subsequent action you need to run, but those artifacts that you need to run there are no longer in the cache, and this design helps to work around doing that. There are some issues with symlink support, especially with tree artifacts. Tree artifacts and build without the bytes are always like, okay, this is calling for corner cases. Again, here calling out for you, if you turn on build without the bytes, you run into issues, let us know, because that helps us to really make this a feature that is available in Bazel 7. And yeah, last but not least, we need a way to download artifacts, intermediate artifacts, if you need them. Sometimes you want to debug, or your IDE needs to access the generated proto output or whatever output to do proper code completion. And we have some ways to do this, to specify what to download. I think actually Louis implemented a flag for this. But I think we can go further and make this even easier. We want to speed up builds by doing async execution. Ulf back there implemented, I think 4 years ago, async execution as experimental feature. We recently removed your code, sorry. And we
remove it synchronously, or async?
Yes.
Now you cannot blame him.
And now we cannot blame him anymore. We have a prototype that is based on Loom, on virtual threads, which should make this much easier to deal with error conditions in the code. Loom will be available from JDK 19+, so this requires us to upgrade the embedded JDK to JDK 19. We are currently in the process of doing performance experiments internally, just to make sure that this upgrade doesn't regress any build times. What we have seen is it actually improves build times, especially under high GC pressure, so even in isolation it's a good idea to upgrade to JDK 19. Yeah, and what I listed here in the first point, I think it's also important in the invocation analyzer was showing up, yeah, increase your number of jobs to 112. Yeah, how should I know this before the invocation? If that feature is implemented, you don't need to tune this flag anymore. What we need to be careful about is async execution will increase the peak memory because we have more actions in flight. Bazel keeps a lot of state around. So we need, at least for wide build graphs, we need to throttle what Bazel actually sends out or processes and keep a balance there and take the actual server memory usage into account when scheduling the actions. We hope that the lessons that we learn from introducing virtual threads here for async execution can also be applied in a dozen other places. You might know that Bazel has like a bazillion threads running, and we can do better than we currently do by using virtual threads in the future. Joe gave a presentation on SkyMelt at BazelCon. If you haven't watched it, there's the QR code. The top one is to his talk. Just in one sentence, the idea is to remove the hard barrier between analysis and execution and already start executing those actions that are ready to be executed after we analyze part of your build graph, where part of your build graph means the whole transitive closure of one top-level target. So this will only help if you specify builds with multiple top-level targets, which is typically a case on CI, for example, where you build everything or a subset of your tree. What we have seen is that it improves performance by 10% or more. It depends, of course, on how many cores you have locally, so how many actions can you actually put in flight. And async execution helps a lot. So we have this one benchmark where we see a 40% improvement, which is great if it's fully remotely cached. Since the BazelCon talk, we ironed out a lot of corner cases. We actually ran SkyMelt with all our integration tests. We didn't do this before, and we're like 50 bugs filed because of that. So we fixed all those 50 bugs, and now it should be ready for dogfooding. The bottom QR code has a link to a GitHub comment how you can dogfood this and how you can report back what you should expect from SkyMelt. And yeah, just let us know how it works.
It's great.
It's great. That's good. Sorry.
You said that it starts execution once the top-level target is fully analyzed?
The transitive closure of one top-level target is fully analyzed, and we...
Start for intermediate.
No, we don't. So you could in theory start executing actions as soon as you're at the bottom of the action graph, but you don't know yet whether you need those actions, right? I mean, we are building up the build graph, and then we are walking down the action graph and only execute those actions that we actually need. So we create many more actions than Bazel has to execute. Yes, a logical next step would be to do this, and then obviously also will help with this UX issue of how many actions does Bazel anticipate to execute, and that counter keeps growing and growing and growing. So hopefully that can be solved in the future.
I might have missed something. If I run Bazel build / then SkyMelt doesn't help me? Because
it does.
It does.
It does. That's the ... is expands to a set of top-level targets, so it will help you in that case. Right. So the software bill of materials is a big thing for some companies, at least more in the US than here probably. But it is important to be solved. Tony is working on upgrading rules license to support these two formats, and create in your Bazel invocation the software bill of materials in that form. We're trying to figure out what the best way to do this to make it work for large companies which have their own ideas how this should be done. So follow along at that GitHub issue and give Tony some feedback.
How does it integrate with Bazel?
I have no clue. Shidong, do you know that? How does rules license integrate with Bazel mod?
I have some ideas. Yeah, Tony has been talking to me. But do you want the whole answer? Because we'll be here for a while.
Okay, later when you're mingle with Shudong and he will give you the full answer. Okay, there's stuff going on with Android. Not only that we are stolidifying rules Android, which should help with iteration speed, but we are also trying to get those tools out that should help you to get a R8, which is like, if you're using Android, you know what it is. So to optimize and DEX your build outputs and mobile install for iterative development to get the new version there. Shudong already gave the talk about Bazel mod. I'm repeating a little bit here. We plan to enable Bazel mod by default for Bazel 7. We can't guarantee that this is happening, but this is at least what we're aiming for. And then later, the workspace file, as you asked, will be phased out either Bazel 8 or 9. Probably in one of them, it's guarded behind a flag, and you still have to pass a flag, and then it's gone in 2025 or so. And we are looking forward to that. I'm pretty sure we will order a cake when this is finally gone. We're currently working on adding log file support, which might be useful to lock down the exact versions that the version selection algorithm calculate it and even check that in and make sure that Bazel only uses those versions for reproducibility. And there then the logical next step is to allow vendoring and an offline mode. I know a lot of people have asked for that. Yeah, well, I'm going on a plane and I want to build my project, download all my dependencies, and I want to do stuff offline, for example. Or for security reasons, I'm Debian. I don't download things during my build process. We want to improve repository caching. I mean, there's this shared cache between workspaces already, but it only shares the downloaded artifacts. It doesn't share the extracted artifacts. So that extraction step and also the hashing and all that has to be repeated all the time. And if you look at the JSON profiles, you will see that this shows up quite a bit. So that should help you. Call for action, as Shudong mentioned, contribute to BCR for the modules that you care about. Add them only if we have a reasonable set of modules on BCR. It's useful for the whole community. This might sound more like a technical detail. We're trying to rewrite, or we're in progress of rewriting all our native rules in StalArc, which hopefully is finished by end of the year, but I'm not making any promises here. It's always a year away. So what we anticipate you will get out of this is that you can independently from your Bazel upgrade switch to a new version of a rule implementation. So there's a fix in the Java rules that you want. Right now you have to upgrade Bazel, which might come with other drawbacks, incompatibilities, so you can't really do this. So the hope is once this is installed, it makes it much easier to do those, and also to extend the rules in a way that you want, because you do this little thing a little different. So just modify the StalArc implementation, which is much easier than modifying the Java code, building your own Bazel, and maintaining your fork basically of Bazel. And hopefully you upstream any fixes that you make locally.
Also, once you are required to take all of the hacks and like improvements that only exist in native, and you need to expose them to StalArc, then other rule sets can use them as well.
Right. We hope not to do that. There's another way to do this and remove the hacks and do proper APIs between.
I'm saying there are capabilities that Java and C++ have that other rules have been waiting for years, and
right.
they will be exposed.
Yeah, they will be exposed in some form. We will see, and that might also change. There might be a first version which only limits those to actually Java and C++, and in the future to other rule sets. Finally, we just cut the RC for 6.1. Please help us testing, give us feedback, so it's not the day we want to push the release button, we get 5 issues. That's how it usually works. So start testing now, give us feedback so that we know what's happening. There's lots of fixes in that release. I think this class path reduction is a big one for many people who are using Java that was not hooked up correctly for Bazel, and no one realized because it was working internally. And only at BazelCon someone mentioned, hey, this is not working, I'm trying this. In general, since we're a community here, we need your help. Give us feedback, report bugs. If you send PRs and we don't respond to them, ping us. We are just humans, so we are sometimes busy with other stuff, and yeah, we just need reminders from you guys that this is really important for you, this PR. Let's get this merged. So looking forward to all your contributions.
Thank you.